All right, let's dive right into this explainer. ISO 14001:2026 is literally rewriting the rulebook for environmental management. We're finally moving past the era where being environmentally friendly was just, well, a nice to have or some separate checklist. Today, we're looking at how this new standard forces organizations to essentially hardwire sustainability straight into their operational DNA.
So, I want to kick things off with a pretty stark question. If your environmental system is just, a dusty binder sitting on a shelf in some isolated department somewhere, what actually happens to your compliance when your core business operations inevitably shift? Well, the reality is, it fractures. When environmental management lives in a silo, it just can't keep up with the speed of modern business, and that leads to compliance failures, hidden risks, and a total disconnect from what's actually happening on the ground.
And that brings us to the core mandate of ISO 14001:2006. It makes it crystal clear that environmental responsibility is absolutely no longer a separate administrative chore. It has to be baked right into your daily operational workflows. Basically, your environmental strategy and your overall business strategy, they have to become one and the same. So Section 1 is all about the end of those silos and building a digital blueprint. We really have to shift our mindset away from isolated, paper-based compliance and move toward a fully integrated digital framework. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that an environmental management system, an EMS, has to be hardwired into your organization's core operating system to survive. Under Clause 4.4 of the standard, we're required to pivot from reactive compliance, which is really just trying not to break the law, to proactive integrated risk management. You aren't just designing an EMS anymore, you're building a digital blueprint that connects literally every single department. Moving into Section 2, defining system boundaries. Before we can even start building this digital architecture, we have to establish our perimeter. Clause 4.3 calls this the EMS scope, which is basically figuring out exactly what's inside our system and what's out. Historically, we always thought of this scope in terms of physical boundaries, right? Your brick-and-mortar factories, your warehouses, the actual building you commute to. But under ISO 14001:2026, the paradigm shift is massive. Your perimeter extends way out into functional boundaries. You now have to account for supplier selection, your outsourced IT data centers, and your digital supply chains. You can't just outsource your pollution and pretend it's not your problem anymore. If you control it, or even just influence it, it is officially inside your perimeter.
Okay, Section 3, integrating core business processes. This is where we talk about hardwiring the core. Let's look at the real heart of our blueprint, which is deploying a cross-functional corporate team to embed these environmental considerations directly into your enterprise architecture. This is where the theory finally becomes operational.
This is the ultimate symbol of systematic embedding. We're talking about a cross-functional corporate team actively integrating environmental considerations into a digital enterprise architecture framework. Just think about procurement, for example. They're using supplier portals to enforce lifecycle sourcing. Meanwhile, production is using ERP software to schedule batches in a way that actively minimizes waste. And IT and logistics, they're tracking data center efficiency on live performance dashboards. Environmental management isn't just the job of one lonely compliance officer anymore. It is structurally embedded into the core business processes of every single department. Because just think about this from an auditing perspective, if an auditor comes knocking today, they are absolutely not looking for a standalone environmental manual. They want to see the exact integration evidence we're talking about here. They want to log into your shared dashboards. They want to see combined enterprise risk registers where environmental risks sit right alongside your financial and operational risks. They are looking for genuine structural, procedural, and behavioral integration across the board. That brings us to Section 4, mapping risks and opportunities. Think of these as the sensors. With the core hardwired across our departments, we need to install our sensors, which is how Clause 6.1 requires us to systematically scan for environmental interactions.
Now let's clear up some technical jargon that honestly trips a lot of people up. An aspect is simply the interaction itself. For example, the energy consumption in your newly outsourced data center. The impact, on the other hand, is the resulting change to the planet, like the actual greenhouse gas emissions generated by that energy use. So in short, you have to map the aspects to understand the impacts.
But here's the reality. You literally cannot tackle everything at once. So the crucial step here is using specific significance criteria to filter out the noise. You evaluate the severity of the impact, how often it happens, your legal exposure, and a really big one, stakeholder concern. This criteria acts as a structured filter to figure out which aspects are actually significant enough to demand your management team's immediate attention and resources.
And remember, ISO 14001 requires a strict life cycle perspective. Your sensors can't just be pointed at your own factory floor. They have to track the entire flow, from the moment materials are sourced way upstream through your own internal operations and all the way downstream to how the customer actually uses and eventually disposes of your product.
Next up is Section 5, Driving Measurable Objectives or Programming the Goals. Now that our sensors are active, reading data and tracking that full life cycle, we need to program our outputs by setting highly measurable objectives under Clause 6.2.
Instead of some vague corporate commitment to just be greener or act responsibly, a properly integrated system demands hard, verifiable targets. We're talking about objectives like a solid 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions intensity, tracked directly through your logistics software. If it's not measurable, it is simply not an objective under the new standard.
But, as they say, a target is really just a wish without a plan. To actually hit those numbers, your cross-functional team has to program a strict action plan architecture. The standard requires you to document exactly what will be done, who is specifically responsible, how it's going to be funded and resourced, and the exact timeline for when it will be completed. This is what prevents environmental goals from just becoming orphaned initiatives that nobody actually takes ownership of.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, Managing Systemic Change. This is all about maintaining the code of our digital architecture when the business inevitably evolves, which is covered under Clause 6.3 for planned change.
Think about how planned change actually works in practice. Say you propose a new piece of manufacturing tech. Well, before you buy it, and definitely before you install it, you have to systematically evaluate its environmental lifecycle impact. Then, you update your digital architecture and your ERP systems to handle the new data. Only then, months later, do you actually implement the operational change. The environmental review has to happen way before the implementation, not as an afterthought when an incident occurs.
So why does this matter so much? Well, if you introduce new raw materials or shift to a completely new IT system without running them through this environmental change process, your entire compliance framework fractures. Uncontrolled change creates hidden risks, it completely fragments your EMS, and it leads to inevitable compliance failures simply because your documented system no longer matches your day-to-day operational reality.
When you finally make that leap from a fragmented, siloed approach to genuine cross-functional digital integration, the strategic value of your EMS absolutely skyrockets. It transforms from this reactive administrative burden into a highly proactive tool. It optimizes your resource utilization, it mitigates massive enterprise risks, and it ultimately turns regulatory compliance into a genuine competitive advantage. So, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over regarding your own operations. Is your organization merely checking the boxes for an audit, just hoping to get by? Or are you truly leveraging this standard to architect a sustainable, digitally integrated enterprise that's genuinely ready for the future? Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me, and I hope this gives you a powerful new perspective on your own environmental management framework.